Here's something most fans don't talk about openly: the relationships between 7 people who were essentially raised together under one of the most intense training systems in modern entertainment history. BTS didn't just become a global phenomenon because of music. They became one because of something harder to manufacture than talent: the way these 7 men actually function together and separately, as real human beings with real histories, real conflicts, and real bonds forged under extreme pressure. HYBE has, over the years, released enough documented material from official behind-the-scenes content to verified interviews to their own produced documentary series to paint a picture that goes far deeper than the polished stage presence most people see. What does it actually look like when 7 people spend more time together than most families do, then suddenly face years of mandatory separation? What happens to friendships built inside a system that demanded everything from them before most of them were even adults? What does loyalty look like when the stakes are a billion-dollar industry and the weight of an entire fandom watching every move? This list pulls directly from verified sources, no rumors, no fan theories, just the documented reality of who these 7 people are to each other. Number 7. The bridge between worlds, Jin. Before Jin enlisted in the South Korean military in December 2022, HYBE documented something that most entertainment companies would have quietly buried: the emotional architecture of what it actually means for a group like BTS to lose its oldest member, even temporarily, to mandatory military service. What came out of that documentation wasn't a polished farewell campaign. It was something more honest than that. And it tells you a great deal about how Jin specifically functions within the group's real interpersonal dynamic. Kim Seokjin, born the 4th of December 1992, was the first BTS member to enlist, entering the 5th Infantry Division as a social service worker before being reassigned to active duty training. HYBE confirmed through their official channels and through the In the Seom content series that Jin had been preparing the other members, particularly the younger ones, for this transition long before the public. Announcement came. That is not a small detail. It reflects something consistent about how Jin has operated within BTS since their debut in 2013. Jin was not a trainee in the traditional sense when he was scouted. He had no prior performance background. He was approached by a Big Hit Entertainment staff member on the street near Konkuk University in 2011 and was recruited almost entirely on physical presence alone. What followed was a training period in which he had to build from near zero, while the other members, several of whom had been training for years, were already polished. HYBE's own documentary material, including Burn the Stage, released on YouTube and Amazon Prime in 2018, captured something that fan edits rarely surface. Jin acknowledging directly that he spent years feeling like the weakest link in the group, not in a self-pitying way, but with the kind of clear-eyed honesty that tells you he had genuinely processed it. What HYBE's content reveals about Jin's relationship with the other members is built on that foundation. He compensated early on, not with performance skill, but with emotional steadiness. In verified interviews and in the Break the Silence documentary series from 2020, multiple members, including Jimin and Jungkook, referenced Jin as the person who consistently diffused tension in group settings. Jungkook, who was only 15 when he joined BTS, and has described Jin as the member who made the dorm feel livable in the earliest, hardest years, has spoken about this in ways that are specific enough to be credible rather than promotional. The dynamic HYBE has documented between Jin and the maknae line Jimin, V, and Jungkook is notably different from his relationship with the Hyung line. With RM, Suga, and J-Hope, the interactions captured on camera carry a different register. More peer level, more willing to push back, more direct. With the younger members, Jin historically occupied a role closer to what in Korean family structure would be recognized immediately: the oldest son energy, the one who absorbs pressure so others don't have to feel it as sharply. His military enlistment and the way HYBE framed it through their content revealed something the group itself confirmed in the 2023 Festa dinner video: that Jin leaving first was, in part, a deliberate emotional choice. He went first so that when the others followed, the path would feel less unknown. That one decision documented and verified, tells you more about who Jin actually is inside this group than a decade of stage performances combined. Number 6. The anchor nobody talks about enough, Suga. Min Yoongi, born the 9th of March 1993, is the member whose real-life relationships within BTS are the most consistently misread by people who only engage with the surface layer of the group's public image. HYBE's documented output spanning years of behind-the-scenes content, the Suga Road to D-Day documentary released on Disney Plus in 2023, and multiple verified interview archives, builds a portrait of someone whose role inside the group's interpersonal structure is almost the opposite of what his public persona suggests. The cold, minimalist stage presence is real. But what HYBE's cameras have repeatedly caught is something that sits in direct tension with that image. Suga, functioning as one of the most quietly protective forces in BTS's internal dynamic, particularly toward the members who entered the system youngest, and carried the most visible psychological pressure over the years. Start with the documented history. Suga grew up in Daegu, not Seoul, in a household that was not wealthy. He has spoken in verified interviews, including the extended 2021 Map of the Soul persona-era content, and his own August D documentary about working part-time jobs while training, about his parents' opposition to his music career, and about a period where he was essentially navigating poverty-level conditions while trying to become a professional musician. He was involved in a serious scooter accident in 2017 that required shoulder surgery, an injury he had been managing silently for years before it became public knowledge. HYBE confirmed the surgery timeline. The fact that he performed through significant physical pain for an extended period without it becoming a public narrative in an industry where health disclosures are often used as promotional content says something concrete about how Suga relates to vulnerability. What HYBE's content reveals about his relationships with specific members is where this gets genuinely interesting. The dynamic between Suga and Jin, both members of the Hyung line and both Daegu connected, carries a specific texture in documented footage, a shorthand that reads less like cultivated friendship and more like people who understood each other's reference points before they needed to explain them. In Burn the Stage, the moments between Suga and Jin during physically and emotionally exhausting tour legs are notably low on performance. They are two people who are simply present with each other, which in the context of 7 people living under constant observation is more meaningful than it sounds. The relationship HYBE has most thoroughly documented, however, is the one between Suga and RM. These are the two members whose intellectual approach to music and identity has been most explicitly explored in BTS's official content, and the dynamic between them captured across years of studio footage, group discussions, and individual interview segments reflects something that functions less like friendship and more like genuine creative mutual respect between two people who process the world similarly but express it through completely different emotional registers. RM has referenced Suga in verified interviews as the member whose opinion on music he weights most seriously. That is not a throwaway compliment in a press context. It is a specific, repeated, documented position. Then, there is the relationship with Jungkook. HYBE content from the dorm era forward shows Suga occupying an unusual position with BTS's youngest member, not warm in the conventional Hyung sense, but consistently present in ways that matter more than warmth. When Jungkook has discussed his trainee years in verified content, Suga is one of the members he references in the context of musical development, not just personal support. Suga's military service as a social service worker, which began in September 2023 and from which he was discharged in June 2024, and his subsequent return to group activities added another verified data, point to his relational profile. He came back and immediately re-engaged with group content without the adjustment friction that might be expected. That kind of seamless re-entry doesn't happen without a foundation that was built carefully over a long time. Number 5. The weight of being the leader, RM. Kim Namjoon. Born the 12th of September, 1994, carries a relationship with BTS that is structurally different from every other member's because he is the only one whose role inside the group was defined before the group itself was fully formed. HYBE's documented output across more than a decade, including the Break the Silence series, the Bring the Soul documentary, multiple Festa dinner recordings, and RM's own solo content surrounding his Indigo album released in 2022, builds a portrait of someone whose interpersonal relationships within BTS were shaped by a responsibility he was handed at 17 that most adults would find overwhelming. Big Hit Entertainment, now HYBE, designated Namjoon as BTS's leader from the pre-debut period. That is a verified organizational decision, not an honorary title. In the Korean entertainment industry's idol system, the leader role carries real functional weight, managing internal group communication, serving as the primary spokesperson in press contexts, and acting as the liaison between the members and company management. Namjoon has confirmed in multiple verified interviews that this meant he was regularly in conversations with Bang Se-hyuk about group direction, creative decisions, and member concerns, while simultaneously being a teenager navigating his own development as an artist. What HYBE's content reveals about how this shaped his actual relationships with the other members is layered and, in places, genuinely uncomfortable in the best possible way. Burn the Stage. The 2018 documentary that remains one of the most unfiltered pieces of BTS content HYBE has released captured Namjoon breaking down during a tour stop in a way that recontextualized everything about how the leader role actually functioned inside the FAS, group's daily reality. He was not breaking down because of performance pressure. He was breaking down because the emotional labor of holding 7 people together across years of relentless schedule had accumulated in ways that had nowhere to go. That moment is documented. It is verifiable, and it fundamentally changes how you read every group interaction before and after it. The relationship between RM and Suga, already touched on in the previous entry, is one axis of this story. But the relationship HYBE has documented most revealingly is the one between RM and J-Hope, who joined Big Hit around the same period and went through the earliest, most uncertain years of the company's existence alongside Namjoon. In verified group content and individual interview segments, J-Hope has consistently described RM as the person who gave the trainee experience a sense of direction when everything else felt unstable. That is a specific relational dynamic, one person functioning as a North Star for another during a formative period, and it has visibly shaped how these two interact in documented footage across the group's entire career. The relationship between RM and V is documented differently, carrying more friction historically, more openly acknowledged distance, and then more deliberately rebuilt closeness. In the 2023 Festa dinner, one of the most candid group conversations HYBE has released in recent years, Namjoon and V's exchange carried the specific texture of two people who had navigated genuine misunderstanding and come out the other side with something more durable than easy compatibility. That kind of documented relational arc is rare in the idol industry, precisely because companies typically sand those edges down before they reach public content. What makes RM's position inside BTS's interpersonal structure uniquely significant is that he has been, by organizational design, the person most exposed to the gap between how the group functions publicly and how it functions privately. He has carried information, absorbed conflict, and represented 7 people's collective reality to an industry infrastructure since before most of those 7 people were legal adults. His solo work, particularly Indigo and the subsequent Right Place, Wrong Person album documents through his own artistic output what years of that specific kind of responsibility does to a person's interior life. HYBE has supported that solo expression consistently, which is itself a data point about how the company understands what Namjoon has given to the group's foundation. Number 4. The one who almost walked away, J-Hope. Jung Ho-sok, born the 18th of February 1994, has a relationship with BTS that contains a fact most casual fans have never fully processed. He was the first member to seriously consider leaving, and HYBE's own documented content confirms it. That single verified detail reframes everything about how J-Hope functions within the group's interpersonal dynamic, because the person who chose to stay after genuinely considering the exit is operating from a completely different emotional foundation than someone who never questioned it. The context matters enormously here. Hoseok grew up in Gwangju, the only BTS member from that city, which placed him in a different regional and cultural reference point from the Seoul and Daegu members from the very beginning. He had a genuine pre-debut career trajectory as a street dancer, winning competitions under the name Smile Hoya and building a local reputation that was real and verifiable before Big Hit entered the picture. He was not recruited off a street corner. He auditioned. He had options, or at least the beginnings of them, and he chose the Big Hit path at a moment when Big Hit was a small, financially unstable company with no guarantee of producing anything significant. What HYBE confirmed through the Suga Road to D-Day adjacent content, the 2020 Break the Silence documentary, and J-Hope's own verified interview history is that during the pre-debut and early debut period, Hoseok reached a point where he formally communicated to company management that he was considering leaving the group. This was not a rumor that surfaced on fan forums. It was acknowledged in official content. The reasons, as documented, were rooted in genuine uncertainty about his fit within the group's musical direction. BTS was being shaped as a hip-hop-focused act, and Hoseok's background was in dance, not rap. He had to build his rap identity from the ground up while simultaneously developing as a performer in a genre that was not his entry point. The decision to stay, and what it produced, is one of the most consequential relationship facts HYBE has documented about BTS's internal dynamic. Because J-Hope staying meant the group retained its specific energy infrastructure, and that is not poetic language, it is a functional description of what he provides. In verified behind-the-scenes content across multiple eras, from the Wings tour footage to the Permission to Dance on Stage concert content, J-Hope is consistently the member who regulates the group's collective emotional temperature in real time. Not in the way Jin does. Jin's role is more structural and long-term, but in an immediate, present-tense way that keeps rehearsals functional and group dynamics from collapsing under exhaustion and pressure. His relationship with RM, already documented in the previous entry as foundational, gains additional weight when you factor in the near departure. RM was aware of Hoseok's consideration of leaving. That awareness, and whatever conversations happened between them during that period, is part of why their dynamic in documented footage carries a specific quality of mutual investment that reads differently from ordinary bandmate chemistry. The relationship HYBE has captured most distinctly between J-Hope and another specific member is the one with Jimin. In group content spanning years, these two occupy a physical and emotional proximity in unscripted moments that reflects genuine long-term comfort, the kind that develops between people who have been each other's consistent presence through shared difficulty. Jimin has referenced Hoseok in verified interview contexts as one of the members he gravitates toward when the group environment feels heavy, which is a specific and telling relational data point. J-Hope's military service he enlisted in April 2023 with the 36th Infantry Division and was discharged in October 2024, becoming one of the earlier members to complete service, added another documented chapter to his relational profile. His discharge and return to group activity was met with the kind of reception from the other members that HYBE captured without heavy editorial framing, and it showed something simple and verifiable. These are people who genuinely missed a specific person, not just a functional role. His solo album, Hope on the Street Volume 1, released in 2024 during his service period, and the documentary of the same name released on Disney+, documented his artistic identity outside the group in ways that made his choice to stay inside it years earlier feel even more deliberate. A person with that much individual creative identity chose the collective. That choice, made once under pressure and reaffirmed continuously through documented behavior, is the most honest thing HYBE has ever captured about who Jung Hoseok actually is. Number 3. The one fame hit hardest, Jimin. Park Jimin, born the 13th of October, 1995, has a relationship with BTS that HYBE's documented content reveals was built on a foundation of insecurity so specific and so prolonged that the closeness he eventually developed with the other members carries a weight that is almost impossible to manufacture. The facts here are not comfortable, and that is precisely why they matter, because what Jimin's verified history tells you about how he relates to the 6 people he built his career alongside is one of the most psychologically honest stories in BTS's entire documented record. Start with the entry point. Jimin was the last member to join BTS before their 2013 debut, arriving at Big Hit Entertainment from Busan's prestigious Korea Arts High School, where he had been studying contemporary dance. He had no prior idol training. He entered a group that was already rehearsing, already bonded to some degree, and already operating with an internal hierarchy and dynamic that he had to insert himself into as a complete outsider. In verified interviews across multiple years, Jimin has described this entry experience with a consistency that marks it as genuinely formative, rather than narratively convenient. He felt behind. He felt uncertain about his place, and he responded by working harder than almost anyone around him could sustain. HYBE's Burn the Stage documentary captured the physical consequence of that approach with uncomfortable directness. Jimin was shown in a condition of genuine physical depletion during the Wings tour, receiving IV drips, performing through illness, pushing past documented medical advice. That footage is real and verified, and the context HYBE provided around it was not framed as inspiring dedication, but as something more complicated, the behavior of someone whose relationship with belonging inside the group was still, years into their career, conditional in his own mind on continued exceptional performance. The relationship this produced with the other members is documented throughout HYBE's content with a specificity that rewards close attention. The dynamic between Jimin and Jungkook, both from Busan, both the youngest in the group alongside V, is one of the most thoroughly captured interpersonal relationships in BTS's entire content archive. In verified behind-the-scenes footage, live broadcast recordings, and documentary content, these two operate with a physical and emotional familiarity that reflects years of shared regional identity, shared pressure as the youngest members, and shared experience of having their entire adult development happen inside the same group environment. Jungkook has described Jimin in verified interview contexts as the member he is most naturally comfortable with, which, given Jungkook's documented introversion, is a statement that carries real relational weight. The relationship between Jimin and V, both 9/5 line members, meaning born in the same year, a designation that carries specific social meaning in Korean age hierarchy culture, is documented by HYBE as one of the group's most openly affectionate bonds. What makes it relationally significant, rather than simply visually appealing to fans, is that it developed during a period when both members were navigating the specific psychological pressure of global fame arriving before either of them had fully established their individual identities. The 2020 Break the Silence documentary captured both members discussing isolation and emotional difficulty during peak BTS fame in ways that were specific enough to be credible and parallel enough to suggest that their backs capitals. Closeness was partly built on recognizing the same experience in each other. HYBE's documentation of Jimin's solo trajectory, his Face album released in 2023, and his English-language single Like Crazy, which reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, making him the first Korean solo artist to achieve that, adds another layer to the relational picture. The album's content dealt directly with themes of identity, belonging, and the difficulty of facing yourself without the group as structural support. That an artist whose relationship with his own place inside BTS was documented as psychologically complicated would produce solo work explicitly about confronting that complexity is not coincidence. It is a person using verified artistic output to process a real relational history. His military enlistment alongside V in December 2023, the 295 line members enlisting together, a decision that was their own and was confirmed by HYBE, is perhaps the single most telling documented fact about Jimin's relationships within BTS. Of all the choices available to him at that moment, he chose not to navigate that transition alone. The person he chose to navigate it with was the one whose parallel experience of the same pressures had been documented by HYBE across a decade of content. Number 2. The youngest who carried the most expectation, Jungkook. Jungkook, born the 1st of September 1997, has a relationship with BTS that is structurally unlike any other members for one simple, verified reason: he has never known an adult life outside of it. He joined Big Hit Entertainment at 13 years old after auditioning and receiving offers from multiple agencies, including HYBE Entertainment, and chose Big Hit specifically because of RM, whose audition performance he witnessed, and which convinced him this was where he needed to be. That single documented decision, made by a child who would not have been legally old enough to sign contracts independently in most countries, set the entire trajectory of his personal development inside a group dynamic he had no adult framework to evaluate. HYBE's content across BTS's entire career has captured what that means in practice with more honesty than most entertainment companies would allow. The Burn the Stage documentary showed Jungkook not as the polished golden maknae of fan mythology, but as someone navigating the specific psychological difficulty of having your entire adolescence and early adulthood managed, observed, and shaped by an industry infrastructure while simultaneously trying to figure out who you are as a person. Those two processes, identity formation and idol system demands, do not run smoothly in parallel, and HYBE's documented content does not pretend they do. The relationship this produced with the 6 older members is the most thoroughly documented interpersonal dynamic in BTS's content archive, precisely because it was the most asymmetrical from the beginning. Jungkook did not enter BTS as a peer. He entered as someone being raised, in a meaningful sense, by people who were themselves still teenagers. RM was 16 when Jungkook arrived. Jin was 17. Suga was 15 when he began training, but was already 2 years into the Big Hit system by the time Jungkook came in. The Hyung line were not adults equipped to parent anyone, and yet the Korean social structure they all operated within placed Jungkook in a position of genuine deference to each of them from day one. What HYBE's documented output reveals about how this played out in real interpersonal terms is most visible in 2 specific relationships. The first is with Jin. Already discussed in this list's earlier entry, the oldest member who made the dorm functional and whose departure for military service in 2022 was, by Jungkook's own verified account in the 2023 Festa dinner content, one of the more disorienting transitions he had experienced inside the group. The second is with RM, whose audition performance brought Jungkook to Big Hit in the first place, and whose leadership of the group has been the most consistent structural constant in Jungkook's entire documented experience of BTS. The relationship between Jungkook and Suga, documented across years of HYBE content, carries a specific quality that reflects something real about how Jungkook developed musically. Suga was the member most directly involved in Jungkook's early musical education inside Big Hit production sessions, vocal development conversations, studio time captured in behind-the-scenes content, and Jungkook has referenced this in verified interview contexts with enough specificity to distinguish it from generic gratitude. He learned what it means to take music seriously, as opposed to performing seriousness about music, largely through proximity to Suga's documented work ethic and creative standards. HYBE's coverage of Jungkook's solo trajectory adds a crucial layer to his relational profile. His self-titled album, Golden, released in November 2023, and the singles leading up to it, particularly 7, featuring Latto, which broke multiple verified streaming records, including spending weeks at number 1 on the Billboard Global 200, documented an artist establishing individual identity after a lifetime of collective identity. The interviews surrounding that release period, verified across multiple outlet records, showed Jungkook engaging with questions about independence and selfhood with a directness that reflected someone genuinely processing what it means to exist outside the group structure for the first time. His military enlistment in December 2023, entering the Army's frontline division, a more physically demanding assignment than several other members received, and his discharge in June 2025 closed a chapter that HYBE had been documenting since he was a child in their building. The person who came back from that service had, for the first time in his documented life, spent an extended period completely outside the group environment that had shaped every prior year of his existence. What HYBE's full body of content about Jungkook ultimately reveals is this: the youngest member of BTS did not just grow up in public. He grew up inside a specific set of relationships that were his entire developmental world, and the documented evidence of how those relationships shaped him is more honest and more complex than the golden maknae narrative ever captured. Every member on this list influenced who Jungkook became. That is not a sentimental claim. It is the most verifiable fact HYBE has ever produced about BTS. Number 1. The one who had to find himself inside the group? V. Kim Taehyung, born the 30th of December 1995, has a relationship with BTS that HYBE's documented output reveals as the most psychologically complex interpersonal story in the group's entire verified history, not because it is the most dramatic, but because it is the most honest portrait of what happens when someone with a genuinely distinct creative identity spends years inside a collective structure that was not always built to accommodate that distinctness. The facts here are specific, verifiable, and tell a story that goes considerably deeper than the visual artistry and fan mythology that typically surrounds this member. Start with the entry point, because it matters more for V than for almost any other member. Kim Taehyung was discovered at a big hit entertainment open audition in Daegu in 2011, not as a primary candidate, but as someone who accompanied a friend to the audition and was noticed by company staff while waiting. He had no formal performance training. He had been playing saxophone and had some exposure to traditional Korean music through his grandfather, but he entered Big Hit as someone whose talent was entirely unformed and whose entire artistic identity would be built from scratch inside the company's system. That origin story is verified and it is foundational because it means V's relationship with BTS was never about bringing an established self into a group. It was about constructing a self inside one. HYBE's documented content across BTS's career captures what that construction process looked like in real interpersonal terms, with a consistency that rewards serious attention. The Burn the Stage documentary, the Break the Silence series, and the 2023 Festa dinner content, arguably the most unfiltered group conversation HYBE has ever released publicly, all show V occupying a relational position inside BTS that is simultaneously the most emotionally expressive and the most privately guarded. That is not a contradiction. It is a very specific psychological profile that HYBE's cameras caught repeatedly without always contextualizing it explicitly. The relationship between V and RM is the one HYBE's content documents with the most visible complexity. In the 2023 Festa dinner, their exchange already referenced in RM's entry on this list carried the specific texture of two people who had navigated real misunderstanding over a long period. What the documented record shows, across multiple content pieces spanning years, is that V and RM process the world through fundamentally different cognitive and emotional frameworks, and that those differences created friction that was real, acknowledged by both parties in verified content, and ultimately worked through rather than papered over. The fact that HYBE allowed that relational arc to be visible in their official content is significant. Most entertainment companies would have edited it into seamlessness. The relationship between V and Jimin, the 9-5-line bond already discussed in Jimin's entry, gains additional dimension when viewed from V's side of the dynamic. What HYBE's content shows about how Taehyung specifically experiences that friendship is that it functions as one of his primary points of stability inside the group environment. In verified behind-the-scenes footage across multiple eras, V's behavior around Jimin carries a specific quality of relaxation, a visible dropping of the performative layer that is present in most other social contexts that reflects genuine long-term trust between two people who came of age simultaneously under the same extreme conditions. The relationship HYBE has documented least explicitly but most revealingly through accumulated detail is the one between V and the group as a collective unit during BTS's peak fame period. The Map of the Soul, 7-era content. The individual documentary segments from Break the Silence and V's own solo interviews from the Layover album period in 2023 build a consistent picture of someone who experienced global fame not as validation, but as a specific kind of disorientation, the experience of being seen by tens of millions of people, while simultaneously feeling that what was being seen was an incomplete or curated version of who he actually was. His Layover album, released September 2023 through HYBE, is the most direct verified artistic document of V's interior relational experience. The album's jazz and soft rock orientation was entirely V's creative direction. HYBE confirmed his primary involvement in its production and its themes of longing, quiet introspection, and the difficulty of genuine connection reflect someone processing years of public life through a private artistic lens. The album debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200, making V one of the few Korean solo artists to achieve that chart position, but the commercial performance is almost beside the point. The content of the album is the relational document. His military enlistment with Jimin in December 2023, the deliberate choice to enter that transition alongside his closest peer rather than alone, has already been noted in Jimin's entry. But from V's documented perspective, that choice reflects something additional. A person who had spent years figuring out how to exist as an individual inside a collective choosing, at a moment of genuine transition, to maintain one of his most important relational bonds through shared experience rather than parallel but separate ones. What HYBE's complete documented output about V ultimately reveals, across more than a decade of content, is something that the fan narrative around his visual artistry and enigmatic persona consistently obscures. This is someone whose relationship with BTS was always also a relationship with the question of who he was outside of it, and whose most significant personal growth, documented in verified content from multiple angles and multiple years, happened precisely through the tension between those two things rather than despite it.